Tis.
Thank you both for coming today.
Thank you, everybody. All right, thanks for coming, and thanks for waiting. It's a little extra past the start time. I'm Stephanie, this is Jared, and we're going to talk today about a great new initiative that we are starting over at the University of California, is creating a multi-campus OSPO network, and we'll go into the details about it in this talk. We'll talk a little bit about the history, and we'll talk a little bit about academic OSPOs. I know a few of you don't need any introduction to the idea of that, but just get everybody up to speed. And then talk about the history of what we did, which at UCSC, which now is expanding to the network. And then I'll give Jared a chance to also talk about some of what they're doing in one of the other campuses that join the network, and then kind of just wrap it up with some kind of next steps and things that we're doing. So first off, who we are is I'm Stephanie Leegee. I am at UC Santa Cruz. I am the lead of the executive director at the Center for Research in Open Source Software, which is kind of the precursor to our open source program office and the open source program office effort. I'm also am the chair of the UC, what is now the UC OSPO network, and helped kind of with all of us together as a somewhat unified group, got through that process of creating the network. And Jared, do you want to use the mic?
Yeah, I'm Jared. I'll give a little bit more information later, but I've been at Berkeley for quite some time. I'm the new executive director of the Berkeley Open Source Program Office, OSPO, but that is a 6-hour-a-week-ish gig. So it's not a huge effort, but what it does give us is a beachhead where we can start having a representation and growing an organization. So I'll talk a bit more of that later. But I also have a background in scientific Python, which I'll also mention.
And I also a little background on myself as well with regards to open source. I actually did start open source when I started at UCSC in 2016. And a lot of what I'm focusing on, which is why I think we're really excited about some of the stuff we're doing with the network, is that I like looking at communities and way of expanding expanding the pipeline of and the talent that's coming into open source by with a lot of different mentorship programs that we run over it. At UCSC and hopefully doing that throughout the network. But I'll talk a little bit more about some of the stuff we've been doing at UCSC a little later. But first questions is let's talk a little bit about just a quick overview of what's going on in University of California. Who's currently in the network? We have 6 campuses working together to create and to forward this network. It's Berkeley, Jared. From Berkeley, UC Davis, Los Angeles, San Diego, Santa Barbara, and Santa Cruz. The top, where are we going? This side, this one, thank you, is the, I'm doing left-right problems, is the, our kickoff meeting where we all got together and kind of talked about all the little pictures, all the little pages you see above everybody's heads, all about a very small portion of our deliverables, because it's actually spread across walls, and we went around and decided through this process who was actually responsible for all those deliverables for our initial goal, or for our initial grant. And then the other one is the a chance that we all got together. We were able to get together at the OSPO for Good event that a number of you probably heard about a little bit, that Jacob Green so well organized and nicely invited all of us. It was a great opportunity for us to kind of see how important OSPOs can be, not just within our university setting, but within the world. And so that was also a great shot, because that was about a month after we kind of officially launched. And it was a good chance for us to really kind of get together as a group again, even though it was a limited number that time. It was still all 6 campuses were actually represented at that meeting as well. So that was very exciting. So that's who we are now. But what we want to actually do is spread it to the full University of California. And with some of the other discussions we've been having today, the idea would also be this could also help expand throughout the state of California as well. So that's kind of exciting activities that we're doing right now. And so for those of you who don't know how UC is pretty large. the University of California system has 10 campuses, and there's also the 5 national labs and 10 medical centers. Now, compared to other parts of California, where I think the California state system has over 20 campuses, and the community college system, for instance, has 100 plus campuses. So we're actually kind of the smaller of the academic units. Within California, we're a bit more of we're the R1s versus like the R2s. And we're the research campuses. But the idea would also be that, if we can get it started within our system, we could actually see it expanding even beyond just the UCs, but also through our partners in the CSU, the California state system, and even to the community college systems as well. So there's a lot of hope that it won't be just something that only sits in the University of California. Now, one question people might have, those of you who maybe know what OSPOs are but haven't seen how they work outside of industry, why are we doing this in academic institutions? And for the many of you may be aware of, especially those in academic institutions, kind of the push recently in the last 5 to 6 years on creating academic OSPOs and creating OSPOs outside of industry, and so more in the public sector. Again, looking at Jacob over there, who is one of the forefront of this effort. And one of the reasons we thought, both us at UCSC and I think others at the other UCs, of why we were thinking about having academic open source program offices or similar entities like that, was this need to create a center of competence on open source and open science within the university, and so people could actually start to get to know each other and find a community within the university. And as we all know, in open source, that community is very, very important for helping people feel like they are empowered and being able to actually do the work they want to do in open source and open science. Open source, of course, is also really important for university research, and trying to make sure that that is clear to leadership as well as is clear to the wider research population, the wider research institution within the university is also important. And then translating the research that's done, and by translation I mean the idea that all the research that is done at universities need to somehow have an impact in the world, be it through industry or but also through other kind of social, having some sort of social impact where it reaches the actual people in the communities around us. Now, as a land-grant university, meaning a public university, we are, as a UC, are kind of, it's part of our mission to make that social impact. So this is a key part of why academic OSPOs and why we see it as one of our major pillars, at least at UCSC, I would say, and I think the other UCs would agree that translation issue is super important. And then also, not to be forgotten, is we're universities, we're academic institutions, we're supposed to be teaching people. So having using open source to really improve and diversify the teaching and community service efforts that we do in our campuses, I think is critical. So that's why we do that. There are a number of us. I did not put Oregon State on this because is Lance here? Because Lance keeps saying he's not in a OSPO, but we all agree that Oregon State actually should be on there. But this is the group, one of the, the kind of the initial cohort of OSPOs. Actually, the initial one was UCSC, Johns Hopkins, Jacob, CMU, and I'm pointing at Tom, and who am I forgetting? Vermont, sorry, and St. Louis. Those were the ones that were kind of our the earlier folks coming in. And then we grew bigger over the last round with some of it through Sloan funding, and then there's also folks that are probably not even represented here who, this is just an initial kind of group from Sloan funded and a few extras that I know and that I've interacted with a lot, but there are definitely more universities coming into wanting to build OSPOs that aren't represented here. So it's definitely a move, going from 0 to this to 12, 14 to actually this doesn't even have all the UCs. So going up to like close to 18 or so in a relatively short period of time. So it's, I think, definitely a move, a very positive and fast move towards becoming much more normalized within the university setting to have something like an OSPO. So that was kind of where we were starting to think why we started to see it as important as well to kind of like try and broaden this, not just with UCSC within the UC system, but have it actually be where multiple campuses had some sort of OSPO or something like that on their campuses. But to go back a little bit and talk a little about the history from Santa Cruz's experience. So what I experienced kind of within this effort. So UC Santa Cruz was the first open source program office within the UC system. So we were one of the original ones funded through Sloan, but our OSPO effort was kind of the next step in a lot of things that we were already doing at UCSC. Now, to understand why UCSC was kind of an obvious choice to some extent, whereas generally people don't think UCSC has kind of a quirky little like history and a quirky little people think of us as being a little bit of a quirky campus. But one thing that is actually really clear about UCSC is how important open source and open science has been throughout its history. And the quote here, that open source and open science actively lead to more impactful work, was a quote from our dean, from the Dean of Engineering, just a couple years back, looking at all of the history that we have and how impactful open source has been for UC Santa Cruz. And it started with, and not to go into too much, just interest of time, it started with the Human Genome Project, which had a lot of work was being done at UCSC on that, and it was actually our researchers that open sourced the Human Genome and started the Human Genome Browser, which is also an open source project, and of course, and then leadership saw, the UCSC leadership saw how important and how much of a good image the UCSC had from that effort. So they were relatively inclined to look at open source positively, unlike sometimes some campuses have had that experience. And a few years later, Ceph, the open source storage system, was developed by Sage Weil, who was at the time a PhD student at UCSC. That, of course, was then leveraged. That he actually was able to continue working on that after his PhD program, sold it to Red Hat for millions of dollars, and then nicely gifted us back $2.5 million to UCSC, which then in turn we were able to create Cruz, which is where I started my open source journey in 2016. So we already had a very established kind of understanding of the importance of open source, particularly open source translation. But through our work at Cruz, we also started all these other things that we found to be important. Community building. I don't think we actually really ever thought about that before, working with the different programs and the projects we were trying to support through Cruz. And it started to make us realize that Cruz, which is a research center within the Baskin School of Engineering, didn't actually totally fit. Or some of the activities we were trying to do didn't actually fit within a research center, or what a research center would typically do. And that's when the discussion and it was just at that time when we were having these realizations, looking at all these different programs we wanted to work on that had covered other issues aside from just like incubation of a postdocs program or supporting graduate PhD students who were looking at working in open source research. And working with industry to help promote that. That was a kind of big part of what Cruz was doing. There was all these other things that we were doing. And then we talked to our friends, Jacob and others at OSPO++ and start to realize, we kind of have an OSPO. We didn't quite realize it. But hey, that's cool. We want to support that. We see how important it was. All the reasons I said academic OSPOs are necessary and really good to have. And so we worked through a number of different folks and were able to get in 2022 a grant from the Sloan Foundation, and one of the initial ones that were given out to build an OSPO on our campus. And these are all the reasons and the things that we were doing specifically within the UCSC, single UCSC campus. A lot of it's stuff I've already talked about, and basically trying to help improve and forward the mission of UC Santa Cruz and what a lot of public universities do through leveraging open source. One of the key things that we also focused on, and I alluded to this a little bit earlier, was the fact that what we really wanted to do is see how we can make this more a system-wide approach. So we started talking to our different colleagues in different campuses. But I have to admit, it really helped. Talking was great. Having some money behind it really helped. So everybody was kind of interested in it, but weren't really sure how everything was going to fit on the different campuses until funding agencies, be it Sloan or NSF, or the one at the bottom is actually a UC, a University of California Office of President related initiative. Those initiatives started to come up, and we were able to kind of formulate proposals with those funding vehicles in mind that helped create and show the value of having a network. So we started meeting to talk about these funding proposals, and then we started to compare notes of how show what UCSC's success on some of this stuff was like, and how that could be replicated on other campuses. And we really then saw how working towards a system-wide approach really made a lot of sense for the UCs, and that it would actually probably have a much more impact than if it was just individual campuses trying to create their own. So why did we want to do this? This kind of leads to answer that question of why we wanted to do this as a network. On part, that was because we were building on each other's work and improving the reproducibility. So being able to basically say, okay, we're working together on this. This is going to aid you in another campus to also build it. And we didn't have to keep reinventing the wheel. So we're learning from each other. Not to say that this is, and I think Jared's going to talk to us about this a little bit more, but not to say that we ever had a cookie cutter approach to how we were going to do it. Actually, all of the campuses that are involved actually have totally different structure, not totally different, but varying structures of how their OSPOs are situated. Jared and mine are in a research center, but we have two or three in the library, three in the libraries, one that's kind of split between the library and a research center. So we understand that each campus is a little different, but we were still able to learn from what the other ones were working on. And we were sharing knowledge because we all, each campus has their own unique kind of excellence, that they're some sort of center of excellence or specific things that they're particularly strong on, and we didn't all have to be good at everything. That's a really nice thing, of course, with why you leverage networks and work together. And I think the diversity of approach was also really helpful and important. And work distribution is great. We can get a lot more done with the network than we could if it was just all sitting in one campus. And I also think it's important, I don't know if it surprises you at all, that sometimes campuses that are in the same system can sometimes have a little bit of a competition, And so I always say that it was really the way we set up the network was a nice way to mitigate what I consider sibling rivalries between the UC campuses. And so that was actually also important, that it was actually done in a network where there was, as opposed to a single campus kind of saying, it's UC led or something, UCSC led or something like that. It was always, it's really important that we made it very much a consensus based approach to the way that we structured it, and as a way that we're actually doing the work. So we have, the spring of this year, we got another grant from Sloan to start that process for the next 2 years of actually building the network. First in these 6 campuses, but in hopes of actually spreading even further than that. And a quick, just how we work, in case people are wondering what the structure looks like. And I will say that these are just our draft images at this point with regards to our org chart. But we have what's called the OSPO leadership group, and that's originally what's going to be made up of all of the PIs and the co-PIs And then we had our kickoff meeting, and everybody kind of looked around the room and went like, that's kind of a bureaucratic, like, certain people had to be PIs, certain people had to be co-PIs because of the way the university system works. We looked around the room and said, I don't feel like I want to kick this person out just because they're technically not listed as a co-PI. And so they should be part of that group. So for the moment, at least, and we said, okay, 6 months down the road, we're going to have to reassess this potentially. For the moment, so basically everyone that had any activity that they were doing within the grant writing actually still remains part of that leadership group. And that's really key because there's still so many different people who have different talents, who have different ideas and different understanding of how like community works or how open source works in general, and also how universities work. I mean, so this is all very important, and everyone has a very level of understanding that being able to tap that core group has been great. But we broke it down to make it workable. And one thing is that the leadership group has a chair that I'm chairing, and I also have co-chair, currently one, probably going to be two, co-chairs to kind of help manage the whole system, or all the activities. But our thematic working groups are actually where a lot of the real work is getting done. So all the activities we're doing are through these thematic groups, and they report back to the OLG. And then we're also doing a task force, which are going to be charged, which are kind of more short-term groups to help like with specific activities, like event planning or something like that. But just as a quick, the schematic over there, the one with all the circles, is a one that we started talking about way in the very beginning, and I just think it's a really good illustration of how we actually work, where a lot of stuff is overlapping, and the different campuses are kind of like those blue spots, and it's really this kind of you can't really see it, I think, in the schematic, but it's this idea that local feedback and the activities that are going on at the different campuses are coming back into the center, back into the leadership group, and we're like adjusting as we go. And so that's another thing. We're very still flexible. We're very consensus driven. And I have to give a shout out to libraries, because a lot of the reasons this is working is because at least in UC, that's how the libraries work together. And it has really been noticeable that there is already that culture within the libraries and that community within libraries that we've been able to kind of draw from and work with. And so it's been a really good way of us structuring how that they work together, or that we work in together. Anyways, quickly, we got a lot we have to do. So like I said, those are all our little blue, the different colored pieces of paper have to do with our deliverables that we have, all these things that we want to do. And there's a large number this is just a selection of what we plan to do over the next 2 years. I want to highlight that one of them is hiring a community manager that's going to work with all of us. So if anybody knows anybody, I think the opening is still posted, so I think it's still valid. So come talk to me, or go look on the UC Davis website, because it's being hired through our UC Davis folks. Oh, it's closed? Okay. You should still talk to me if you're still interested, because I know the person who's doing it. So I'm pretty sure she'll keep it open or you can still have more people applying. So. All right, and then I also want to point out the last point of really part of what the network is doing is actually helping each campus create their own independent, like functioning OSPO that is different from the ones that are going to be that are not all the same, that are autonomous, working together, but also at the same time meeting the needs of their campus. And I think that's a really kind of the critical part, that we're all working together, but we're all a little different. And with that note, I'll let Berkeley talk about theirs.
Yeah, so I'm Jared, and this is our new website. And the leadership team you can see on the far side. So Fernando, me, and my other colleague Stefan. I don't know how many people here are use Scientific Python, NumPy, SciPy, Jupyter, IPython. Interesting. Okay. Yeah. So that's sort of the community that we're from. So we've largely been focused externally on sort of open source scientific software development for Python. And that has been largely a volunteer organization that is multinational and not really Berkeley-centric. We've been at Berkeley, though, for quite some time, and we've always been increasingly trying to figure out how to engage with Berkeley, and this OSPO is just the perfect mechanism for that. So it's not a lot of funding, but what it does give us is a beachhead. So now we have an organization that's sanctioned on campus where we can start being a hub for activity, a home for activity. And that's, I think, really what I think these OSPOs are about, is sort of providing a home or a hub for the open source activities on campus. So Berkeley has been thoroughly involved with open source software since before it was open source. The BSD license is one of the classic licenses. It's from Berkeley, obviously. A lot of early Unix software came out of there, which eventually led to some of the, the Linux distribution that you probably are familiar with. Tons of other open source projects coming out of the computer science department. But at this point, open source is not niche, right? It's like everywhere on campus. Every department has some aspect of it. So these open source program offices sort of are multi-discipline across campus entities, which is, I think, part of one of the reasons why a lot of them in academic systems have been situated in a library, which is already serving the campus instead. And this has been an interesting opportunity learning about the library systems as well, which I'm really excited about. I've grew up loving going to libraries and reading books, so that sort of story history I think is really interesting to get involved with. The other thing I wanted to say is this idea of what an OSPO is really an interesting sort of question now. Jacob earlier today in a meeting was talking about what is an OSPO, and he put up the acronym and sort of played with the idea of what that acronym could be. So open is, I think, the beginning, but then he was saying source, science, program, policy, office, organization. There's lots of aspects of this, and I think what you'll see is probably a lot of different universities are going to have different flavors of these things. And then the benefit of having this network at Berkeley, at UC, is that we get to work together so that we can benefit and leverage all of our expertise to provide better service for the whole system wide. I also think that that it's one of those moments where, for a long time I was working on scientific Python, and everyone was using different packages, and they were not going to use it. And all of a sudden, there's some kind of critical mass happened, and overnight, it felt like for people that have been pushing this stuff for so long, it just sort of took off like wildfire. And I feel like OSPOs are doing that as well. So, as soon as this came out, we just joined it, I guess in May-ish. But since then, I've been talking to colleagues at the CSUs, at the national labs, and they're all asking about how do we get involved, how do we make an OSPO, what are the advantages. And so from my perspective, one of the advantages is that it's a sort of a home for bringing people together on campus. When I first started working at Berkeley, and a lot of us working at open source, we were really trying to just stay hidden. We just didn't want to be discovered. We didn't want to have campus pay attention to us. We were worried about them coming in and trying to say, hey, this is our property. You can't give this stuff away. What are you doing working on this stuff on the nights and weekends? You're an employee. Because in the beginning, most of the open source stuff that many of you might know were volunteer efforts. But now that we have this campus-wide organization that's embracing open source, I think we're going to be able to come together and advocate policy to administration on campus, across the UC systems, but also from that leverage point, we're talking to other systems like the UT system, University of Texas, but also now we can have policy positions where we can get people together, different faculty, and come up with a position for a UC-wide, perhaps even more than UC-wide OSPO, where we can take these recommendations and policy decisions and go to funding agencies like NSF or NASA or non-American funding organizations as well. It also is a place where I think students now coming into campus are extremely familiar with software development. Having a GitHub account's not unusual. We have a program on UC Berkeley called Data 8, I think. And they currently, I think half of the university takes that course. Half of the university. It's a massive, so this is not computer science. It's not computer science and statistics. It's not computer science statistics, electrical engineering, and a couple other fields. It's everyone on campus. And so now with all of this brain power, all of this enthusiasm, I think having a place where you can sort of highlight the contributions and the benefits and coordinate a lot of the things. Open source is again, I think we've heard this a lot here. It's about a community. And so those issues, back in the early days of open source, the tooling was really difficult to work with, and now it's a lot more easy. And so in the beginning, it was like a sort of a elite tribe of people that were a little bit bristly sometimes. And it took us a lot of effort to figure out how to turn ourselves into a welcoming and inclusive community. And now these lessons have been learned, and I think we can leverage them. And by presenting these sort of right ways of dealing with community, right ways of building community, right ways of interacting and onboarding new contributors, I think we can have these lessons distilled and handed off to the next generation. And that also is one of the things for open source that's essential. So if you've got open source in industry, that's one thing. But a lot of the open source software that I care about is volunteer-based. And it's just the case that as people's lives and careers and families mature, their nights and weekends get more and more full. And also, I think you'll probably experience as you get older, your ideas get old and stale, and your thinking gets less flexible. And so I think for open source to be vibrant and continue, it's going to both need fresh blood for just the pure labor, but also for understanding new directions and new ideas. So I guess there's a little, how much time are we at? And 50 minutes, okay. Yeah, so I'll just speak a few more minutes. So I just want to say a little bit about the scientific Python community, which is something we've been building up at Berkeley. So it is an open source ecosystem largely of volunteer packages and volunteer projects where a lot of the effort's being done for free. And I think that the software is really important. So, a lot of the stuff we started out is like, you're just doing your research, you're using this stuff, but it becomes really important. And so now if you look at the first imaging of a black hole, that was done with a huge amount of open source software. It used NumPy, it used SciPy, it uses Matplotlib, it uses NetworkX, scikit-image. The Ingenuity helicopter that's flying around on Mars uses the software. And so what that means is, as a young person, you can come in and you can become a member of a team by contributing, and you can start out easily, right? You can do bug reports, you can help out reviewing code, you can work on documentation, you can do training and teaching, showing people how to use it. And eventually you might want to become more of a maintainer. And what that means is you're contributing to software in your spare time or your hobby that is going to advance the state of human knowledge. It's also stuff that's being used, which I don't know as much about because I've been in the science world, but it's being used by governments. It's being used by different industries. So you're contributing with your volunteer effort, not just to scientific discovery, but to the structures that build the economy, that support development, that are tackling, what we've been talking about the UN meeting and today, sort of the grand challenges that we face as a species for our survival. So I think it's really an exciting time, and I think you're going to see a lot of expansion and growth of these OSPOs. I think it's going to be, something that as you're, especially for the younger people in the audience, as you're growing and thinking about what you want to do with your career, I think this is an opportunity to contribute back to society, but also gain skills that will be marketable and help shape the future of society. So I'm really excited, and I hope more people get involved, and I hope that these OSPOs expand and keep going. So I think we're ready for questions now, or is there another slide?
But you can stay up here.
Sure.
You basically said why it matters, so
Okay.
we almost can just say. But I think Jared alluded to part of this as well, where why all this matters. Why are we talking about OSPOs in academia or OSPOs outside of industry, and also networking OSPOs together, working together within not just a network of OSPOs, but networks of similar sectored OSPOs working together, is that really it does promote the collaboration. I think we see it we see it strongly in the UC network, where the collaboration, all of those working groups we're talking about are all are coming from all different campuses working together. And Jared pointed to the fact that it's a lot, the diversity of the different stakeholders involved is a really key part of that. Many challenges are too complex for one group, and especially or for one campus in this case. And I think that tackling them as a group is important, and what Jared also was alluding to. And for me, a lot of what it is trying to normalize that working in open in academia, because I still think we're kind of not quite there yet. This helps normalize the fact that we're supposed to be working in open. We're supposed to be, and the reason for that is because it makes our ability to impact society and the world through innovative research go way faster and go way further. So with that, I think that is the last slide. Yes, it is. So thank you for listening. Jared just put up our UCOSPO.net, which he had to point out to me. He was like, that's cool because it's UC OSPO Network. And I'm like, oh yeah, I didn't even catch that. So thank you for me realizing oh, that's really cool. So we have that URL now and it's up. It's still work in progress. We have, I think, one page up. Yeah, I have to give him text.
It doesn't say coming soon, but like when you look at it, you'll see those words.
It's like, oh yeah, still a work in progress. So, but yeah. So anyway, so questions?
Yes. Should we get a?
Yeah, so there's 10 minutes left. Well, first, thank you for the. We do have 10 minutes left, so yeah, if you want to take some questions. I don't know if that's working here.
Anyway, a lot of the information and practices you were talking about sharing are not particular to academia, right? So are you doing a collaboration with users and collaboration with
Yes. Well, I can answer Mike. I mean, and you can feel free to answer yours as well. But yes, I'm a member of. I'm supposedly a member of the To-Do group. I never show up to the meetings anymore, but I am friends with Anna. So yeah, we interact with them. I'm part of Chaos as well, and I try and interact with some of their industry group as well. And then we interact. Our board members are for UCSC, and then to some extent that means at the moment the network are Spot, and so people from OSPOs, industry OSPOs. So we're definitely interested in working with, continuing to work with industry. Cross, I didn't bring up too much because it wasn't so pertinent, but our advisory board we have an industry advisory board on Cross. We've worked with industry in that period when we were focusing more just on the tech transfer aspect of it and building open source projects within the university. So for me, I think we're very open to it, and I think all the other parts of the network are as well. Do you want to add to that or?
Yeah, so again, we just started ours in end of May, and since then I've been to meetings and a few other things, so I haven't had a huge amount of time to get this, and I still haven't even reached out to most of the campus people, and so this is something that's going to be a work in progress, but certainly there's obvious places we need to interact with, so I think GitHub, Microsoft, it's a really important one to deal with, and so we've been reaching out to they have a GitHub for education group or something. There are some differences in what I think industry's focus is. So I come from like the volunteer community open source, where we every new user we get is an expense, which is not the thing that industry has, right? So typically industry wants lots of users. What we want is lots of community members. So I think a lot of our community has gotten very good at growing a community of developers, and we're not as good at marketing and reaching out to users as much. And so I think industry has an alternative aspect, which is where they're very good at figuring out how to cater and reach and advertise and drum up user base. But I don't think they're necessarily as good at figuring out how to release control and hand things over to a community in a consensus-based government fashion. And that's probably going to be necessary that those continue on some level, but I think there's some lessons learned on both sides. I also think that a lot of the academic open source software we use is heavily used in industry, and I think that it would be the morally right thing to do for industry to help fund that, but that's obviously not going to be enough. But there's a risk they have, which is that as they're relying more and more on these open source community developed initiatives, they're going to have to make sure that those things are reliable. And as you've seen with some recent supply chain attacks, the mechanisms that our community used for onboarding new developers are easily susceptible to interested malicious parties who have the time to spend years gaining trust by coming on and slowly building up credentials by doing good work, and to the point they get elevated to a position where they can be malicious. I don't know how to handle that, but that's something I think we would love to figure out a way of having good collaborations with industry to solve that problem. And it's not a technical problem alone. A lot of it is social, and it's about how communities work. So I think there's some aspects of our academic research that would go well there, but that stuff will still need funding, and there's probably some training and other things that I think would be good to collaborate with. That said, I think we're still trying to figure out better mechanisms for that, and I would love to have more discussions with this. And I think it would also, I think the need for OSPOs in industry arose for a slightly different reason than it did in academia, but they have both appeared. And so I think, figuring out how to leverage each other and work on that is going to be an interesting and exciting challenge that we'll have to move forward. Yep. I think there was another question. I'm not going to bring this back because it's dead, but speak up, please.
Are all those similarly to you? Or
Yeah, majority. All right. Yeah, I would say the majority. The ones that weren't, those were the ones that, majority of them are specifically the Sloan funded ones, and they're part of the Curious group, which is the Sloan funded group that kind of brings all of us together. Tom all the time. But there are ones that are coming out that I didn't list, but you're actually starting to see more of. And like I said, Oregon State I think should be up on that list. But there's definitely ones that are starting to work. Yeah, I can't think of other ones that are coming up on their own without funding. I know that there are. I just can't think of any off the top of my head. But people are definitely, like you were saying, people are reaching out. MIT is interested in one. I know people that are coming to us to talk to us and to talk to the other academic OSPOs about it.
Yes, I know I have some colleagues that are talking about trying to start this, and they run into the main problem, which is that if you want to have a university sort of high level center where you take a name like OSPO, having that promoted and embraced by your university is a lot easier to do when you bring in some money with it. And so I think that it's possible that administration's not really going to buy on to sort of a rogue faculty just saying I believe in this, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to make this a high level thing. That might be possible, but with Berkeley, we didn't get a lot of money, but I think just having that little bit made it easier to sell to deans and stuff to have us as a high level org where we can get an ospo.berkeley.edu address.
I do want to think that as that list gets bigger, I think it starts to get a little easier to do it without having a separate seed funding, because it becomes, and that's where I'm hoping it's the whole effort is going towards, is having it more it's the normal thing to have.
Yep.
Oh my gosh, you have to have it. Of course you have to have an OSPO because you have a tech transfer office. Why don't you have it? I want it to be in that line, hopefully and that's more of a sustainable model, because I do feel like OSPOs being constantly only on soft money is an issue. And I think Lance talked about that today. So
yep.
And we're discovering it too. I mean, I'm used to being off soft money, but not all of the people that are in the network. It's important to actually have something where the universities see it as important.
So we have 5 minutes.
I think right now, at least from UCSC's perspective, I think there is a tension, but it's more of an education issue with regards to making sure tech transfer understands that there are you're not losing anything by going the open source route. That's the way this project should go. You know, it's kind of this idea of like, our faculty director described it perfectly at one point, and I'm like, oh, I need to write that down. He's like, 5% of the stuff coming out of our university, well, I need to make that number, but it should go like proprietary. You know, that's the way that makes sense. 95% of the innovative stuff coming out, though, it's not going to work if it goes that way. It's just going to stall. So open source is the way to go, and like the numbers are made up. But his point is the vast majority, and I agree with this statement. The vast majority of stuff really is only going to be impactful if it is open source. So there isn't a one way or the other. And I mean, for a lot of the stuff. So I think that's where our discussion, at least with me, the discussion goes to with my tech transfer. It's not that I'm taking anything away from it, I'm putting it in open source. It's more that it wouldn't have worked anyway, or it wouldn't have worked as well. So let's just see what makes sense for that project. And that's at least where I work with them. I do think there's still pushback in a number of tech transfer offices, but a lot of them are like throughout the country. I am thinking are much more interested in having. Yeah, I'm gonna say Tom might, yeah, Tom from CMU.
Yeah, I'm from Carnegie Mellon. Like we have a good relationship with our tech transfer office. I think a lot of the conversation isn't if, it's how, and that's where the tension falls under that. But like, there's not a lot of discussion of like if it should be open source or not, because that seems to be, like you're saying, it's pretty baked in and obvious. It's just like, how do we get there, and to what degree, and in what manner? So like, that's more of the conversation, which surprised me when I started seeing the OSPO. Yeah, so there's tension, but I'd say it's a lot more collaborative.
Yeah, do we have a
license or
are we done?
license for that?
I think we're done. Yes.
Like, do you have
Oh, it's Brett's up next, so
oh, okay.
Okay.
it's his time. He's
They're not adding on.
Well, maybe I'll just.
Starting them late. Okay, well,
We already are late.
No,
Oh.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I thought they were just moving everybody back.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're 15 minutes past what we're supposed to be
Okay.
on, right?
All right.
Okay. Yeah. While you're coming up, I'll just say I think it's also like more confusion than tension. Like one of the illustrations I have is one of the first grants I wrote at Berkeley said I would release the software under BSD, and the tech asked what BSD was, and I was like, "That's your license."